Hello, very warm welcome to Middle East Matters. I'm Sanam Shantier. Coming up on this week's programme, Lebanon's Prime Minister Saad Hariri resigns amid anti-government protests that have paralysed the country. The opposition movement wants an end to corruption and economic woes. A look at the future of the Islamic State group after the death of the world's most wanted man, BAKR al-BAGHDADI. Donald Trump hailing the operation a great success in his Syria policy. Also on this week's show, we'll be speaking to award-winning filmmaker Nadav Lapid about his film Synonyms, which hones in on struggles with the Israeli identity. Thank you for watching this week's Middle East Matters. We start with protests raging across the region. Nationwide rallies, at times violent in Lebanon, have brought the country to a virtual standstill, with banks, schools, and many businesses shut down. The protesters want a complete overhaul of an establishment that they call corrupt. And what's notable about this movement is that it cuts across all sectarian lines. Now, earlier, in a bid to quell the protests, Prime Minister Saad Hariri announced his government's resignation. Let's take a listen.
I put my resignation in the hands of the President and all the Lebanese people. Positions come and go, but what's important is the dignity and security of the country. I also say there is no one bigger than their country. May God protect Lebanon. Long live the people and Lebanon.
Now here's a report from our team on the ground in Beirut, a look at how women have taken an active role in these protests.
With one swift kick, she became an icon. When Malak Al-Lewa Hertz drop-kicked a politician's bodyguard who was shooting at protesters on the night Lebanon's anti-government protests broke out, it was caught on camera and instantly shared across the country.
I wasn't scared. We are dying in this country, so I got closer to him and said, "Shoot me." I hit him. It came from the heart. It's not his right, whoever he is, to carry weapons against us when we are unarmed and demanding our rights.
It was the start of a protest movement which has been defined by the presence of females on the front line. Walls of women like these have cropped up at protests across the country, using their bodies as barriers to keep the peace between riot police and male protesters, knowing both sides are afraid to touch them. Seen as one of the Middle East's most liberal countries, Lebanon maintains many discriminatory laws, including women not being able to pass nationality onto their children, and lax prosecutions allowing domestic violence to go unpunished.
For me, a woman's role on the ground is literally the same as a man's when it comes to organisation or protesting for our rights, now that we have independent women who don't have male partners, who live by themselves and work for themselves.
Here at the women's camp in downtown Beirut's Yara Sola Square, female protesters work in shifts, some staying here overnight, to ensure a constant presence just meters from Lebanon's parliament. For these women, it's their obligation to fight for their country's future. Naila Saba is one of the women unofficially coordinating female networks across the country. She's delivering tents and blankets donated to the camp by mothers who can't attend the protests because they have young children, but want to help.
It's not a group that started in any sort of political movement. It's just a group of women that came together to keep each other informed, where people are needed, so we get constant messages. Such a powerful tool in these kind of protests. Last night, within 10 minutes, we'd had the camp re-equipped after the damage.
Next day, and the new generation of female activists is also out in force. YASMINA and Suhaz Rek, students at the American University of Beirut, have been blocking roads every day since the protests began to pressure the government.
The reason young women is so important for this is because young women do not have the patience for it anymore. They're seeing what's happening to the world.
After seeing the initiative that's been put into this revolution, especially, us, the women, are the future of this country.
These young women say society's perspective on their role has shifted after seeing them in action. Having seen their potential for power, they want to fight for change for every Lebanese woman before them, and those still to come.
In Iraq, more scenes of violence. Over there, anti-government demonstrations, which erupted earlier in October, have turned deadly. The movement has been largely spontaneous and leaderless. Iraqis are calling for an end to corruption, unemployment, and poor public services. Over the past days, they've been met with tear gas and bullets from security forces. We move on now to the death of the world's most wanted man, the leader of the Islamic State group, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who blew himself up as US troops closed in on him during a raid in northern Syria. But many observers believe this does not spell an end for the terrorist organization. They say the underlying reasons for his jihadist group's existence remain.
The hideout of former Islamic State group leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi reduced to a pile of rubble. His death represents an undeniable symbolic blow to the terrorist organization, though for many specialists, the group is likely to long outlive its former leader.
The Islamic State group is above all an ideology. It doesn't depend on any one person or people. The cult of personality was never an important aspect of its rule. And within the Islamic State group, there's even a clear structure with an advisory council, which is already preparing Baghdadi's succession.
Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi rose to the top of al-Qaeda in Iraq when its then leaders Abu Omar al-Baghdadi and Abu Musab al-Zarqawi were killed by Iraqi and American forces in 2006 and in 2010. And though al-Qaeda's decline was largely considered inevitable after Osama bin Laden's death in 2011, the extremist network still operates in several regions. According to France 24 journalist Wassim Nasser, the Islamic State group too will undoubtedly survive, even after Baghdadi's elimination.
What's most important is that their ideology has spread. They've been able to compete with Al-Qaeda even beyond Iraq and Syria. The epicenter of jihad in Africa is around Lake Chad, where the Islamic State group is present. They're in the Sahel, in Burkina Faso, in Yemen, and even in the Philippines.
After losing much of its territory in Iraq and Syria, the organization has gone further underground. The local cells continue to carry out attacks in several countries. Syrian Kurdish forces in particular fear reprisals.
Our intelligence and security forces are going to intensify efforts to pursue and combat the Islamic State group's different cells and leaders.
The Turkish offensive against Kurdish forces in northeastern Syria has generated heightened fears of the Islamic State group's resurgence. Hundreds of its jihadist fighters and their family members escaped from Kurdish-controlled camps after Ankara's invasion of the region.
Now to a Franco-Israeli film about exile and the struggles with cultural identity. Synonyms is said to be a partly autobiographical movie inspired by the filmmaker Nadav Lapid's own experiences, and it was the winner of the Golden Bear earlier this year. Let's take a look at a clip from Synonyms, all about a young Israeli man who's just arrived in France.
איזה שיר?
איזה שיר?
Je suis arrivé en France pour fuir Israël. Fuir cet état méchant, abominable Dieu, lamentable, répugnant, détestable, abruti, étriqué, bas d'esprit, bas de cœur.
Aucun pays n'est tout ça à la fois. Choisis. Qu'est-ce que tu vas faire ici?
Je ne sais pas. Je serai français.
Ça ne suffit pas.
Partir, repartir.
Poi, ça va? Attends, c'est bon.
La vie est sublime.
La France, la France. Tu connais qui comme Français à part nous deux?
Céline Dion.
Well, we're now joined by Nadav Lapid. Thank you so much for being with us. Can you tell us where you, Nadav, begin and where the protagonist, Yoav, ends?
The film is really based on my own personal experience. Myself, I passed 3 years and a half even in the Israeli army during my military service. And then after a year, I felt kind of urgency, kind of obligation. I felt that I must leave Israel, that I must run away, that I must save my soul from what for me was a kind of collective disease or sickness or madness or blindness. And several days later, I've landed in Charles de Gaulle Airport with this determined existential plan to stop being Israeli and becoming French. So the things are pretty mixed in this case.
So it's very mixed. Of course, both you and the character had this burning desire, this need to become French, but it doesn't so much work out in the end in the film. Is that the thought, the message that you want to leave the viewer with, that we can't ultimately shake off what's within us, our identity?
I'm not a big fan of messages, because for me, in a way, I've tried to expose different levels of human existence. And one of them is the fact that, as you said, that we, in a way, we are prisoners of ourselves, of our own identity. At the same time, I think that the main character in Synonyms keep on fighting. In a way, he's a real warrior, because he's all the time fighting against this actual present, and he's all the time trying and trying harder and harder. And even if the end you fail, keep on moving and trembling and vibrating. It's a kind of a noble activity.
Now, Nadav, this isn't the first time that you're exploring this theme. Perhaps not a message, but a theme. You have been rather critical of Israeli policies in your previous works.
I think when you're intimate with a place, you're also critical. I mean, I think it goes together. It's a little bit. I mean, I have a lot of very harsh critics about Israel. At the same time, it's a part of myself and my identity. So in a way, I feel that I'm critical also towards myself.
So very briefly, if you can, Nadav, people in Israel don't feel necessarily that you're attacking them, that you're being critical of the nation as a whole?
I think that people in general, at least some of them, they appreciate sincerity. And I think that at least some of them, they feel that there's something extremely sincere in the complex discussion that the film is trying to create regarding Israel, for instance. So they can accept it.
Nadav Lapid, thank you so much for speaking to us here on Middle East Matters about that fantastic film, Synonyms. And thank you for watching this edition of the show. Do stay tuned to France 24.